It's one of the world's biggest pharmaceutical companies.
AstraZeneca is the business behind countless prescription drugs used in treatment for conditions including cancer and asthma, as well as vaccines for infectious diseases. After a long period of decline, the business has returned to growth, which it aims to continue through a focus on innovative science and use of technology and data, all under the leadership of CEO Pascal Soriot, who has been at the helm since October 2012. I sat down with him in London for the CNBC Conversation.
Pascal Soriot, AstraZeneca CEO, thank you very much for joining me. Welcome to the CNBC Conversation.
Thank you for having me.
So you've been CEO of AstraZeneca since 2012, and AstraZeneca, of course, a global science-led biopharmaceutical company. How would you describe your time at the helm?
I would say very exciting. I mean, it's been really a tremendous journey, very rewarding. I mean, stressful from time to time, as you can imagine, but really, really rewarding. I've worked with a fantastic team of people over the last few years, and we have done great and certainly achieved a lot of what we wanted to achieve. We haven't been successful every time, and this is the name of the industry. We want to be innovative, and if you want to be innovative, you're going to fail from time to time. But overall, we've achieved quite a bit. We've evolved, of course. We are a lot more focused on specialty care when the company historically had a strong presence in primary care. So we have more and more specialty care products, but we still have a strong presence in primary care and respiratory disease and diabetes. And of course, people are different, and we are in different locations. We now have biologics in our portfolio, not only small molecules, but fundamentally the same drive to develop medicines that make a difference for patients.
What have been some of the key challenges associated with transitioning away from being more of a primary care focused company to more of a targeted medicines specialty pharmaceutical company?
So I think moving to an approach that is more targeted requires a different mindset. People have to no longer think about, okay, I'm going to reach a whole range of patients, large groups, to, okay, how do I target the right patient who will benefit from our medicine? So it's a cultural change, but I think we are able today at AstraZeneca to do both. We're able to think targeted, but we're also able to think there is a need for some patients, for some diseases to reach out a large number of patients. Asthma, COPD, diabetes, you have to reach a large number of patients. In oncology, it's the opposite. You target specific groups.
What kinds of challenges and opportunities have come with the aging population and your fight along with the broader pharmaceutical industry to try to combat some of the hurdles that come with an aging population?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, if you think about it, 30 years ago, people died of heart attack at age 50, 55, and I know that very well. My father, unfortunately, died at age 52 of a heart attack. And in those days, there were not really great medicines to treat hypertension or cholesterol, things that today, appear to be obvious, right? But there was not a lot of good treatments. And today, with statins, with good antihypertensive medicines, people have a lot less heart attacks, and if they do, instead of having those at 55 years of age, they have it at 75. So a lot of progress has been made, and people live much longer, as we all know. Now, new issues have emerged, because if you get older, something is going to go wrong, unfortunately. So cancer is emerging, and cancer is emerging as an epidemic, driven by the fact people are living longer, which is a good thing, but issues come with that, but also environmental factors, maybe pollution and some other issues. Another big problem from a healthcare viewpoint is Alzheimer. So I think the challenges we face as a society come from a good thing, which is people live longer. But of course, then other diseases come along, and all of that needs to be funded, and the funding of healthcare is of course an issue.
Research and development is an important part of your business. Talk me through the R&D strategy at AstraZeneca and why it's so important.
Because it's basically the fundamental of everything we do. our industry is relatively simple actually. It's all about delivering, discovering and delivering new medicines to patients that make a difference to medicine, right? The difficulty is to getting this done efficiently and successfully. But if you don't deliver new products to patients, basically you have no future, because the model is very simple. The model is you discover a new medicine, society accepts to pay a fair price for it, and of course you can debate what fair means in that context, but let's say a fair price for, let's say, 15 years, and then society will get that medicine for almost for free as soon as generics come along for the rest of history, right? And so after, say, 15 years or so, you lose patent protection. So as a company, you have to run fast to replace the products that disappear. And that's really what drives us, and that's a good thing, because it's this pressure, survival pressure, if you may call it that way, forces us all in the industry to innovate and come up with new medicines.
Why have you chosen to focus specifically on the areas of oncology, cardiovascular, renal, and metabolism and respiratory?
Well, two reasons. First of all, if you look at the biggest killers in the world, the diseases that have the biggest impact from a mortality viewpoint, cardiovascular remains the number one, oncology, cancer, and then respiratory disease, which is something that people don't always know. Asthma, severe COPD, chronic bronchitis, kill people as you have exacerbations. The other reason for us as a company is that we had a legacy, history of good research in those fields, and also commercial teams are there around the world.
Still to come on the CNBC Conversation.
AstraZeneca CEO Pascal Soriot on advancements in the fight against cancer.
We are within striking distance of curing some cancers, or actually improving survival rates to 90% and above.
Now, the cost of developing new medicines continues to rise, and regulators and payers are demanding greater evidence of the comparative effectiveness of medicines. What has this meant for you as a scientific innovator?
Well, it actually means that clearly we have to come up with drugs that make a difference and improve clinical care. And in improving clinical care, they also reduce healthcare costs. So for oncology, what that means, or specialty care in general, what that means is you have to be targeted. So how do you deliver the right medicine to the right patient? So most of our oncology products have a targeted approach.
Now, patent protection is a huge issue for the pharmaceutical industry, and I understand that generics constituted 84% of the prescriptions dispensed in 2018 in the US. That's a pretty staggering percentage. How do you think that you've dealt with this genericization of the prescription drug industry?
Well, you keep running fast, innovating, and coming up with new medicines for diseases that are not properly treated or not treated at all. I mean, Alzheimer's is not treated at all. In our case, there's an explosion of science in cancer. I mean, if you think about it, the so-called HER2 positive breast cancer is a very aggressive disease. 20 years ago, women with HER2 metastatic breast cancer would die quite rapidly. And then Herceptin was introduced, and more recently newer agents that can be combined with Herceptin. And today the survival rate at 5 years is about 93 or 95% in these women. Now, another example is lung cancer. If you're diagnosed with lung cancer stage 4, which is the last stage, and you're metastatic, your survival rate at 5 years is 5%, or used to be 5%. The introduction of immunotherapy has increased that to 25%, but 25 is not 100. What we are aiming at is curing cancer. So we want survival rates of 95, 100% at 5 years and beyond. So this is really what you have to do, constantly try to improve, and there's a huge amount of unmet needs still in many diseases.
How close are we to curing cancer?
I think, it's really exciting. I mean, today, being in the pharmaceutical industry is I mean, I've been in this industry quite some time now, and it's suddenly one of the most exciting times I can remember, because science is breaking out in oncology in particular, but also outside of oncology. And there's a lot of new medicines that are coming that are offered to patients. That's one aspect of cancer. But the other aspect is we're now close enough to be able to diagnose easily cancer very early on. And the earlier you diagnose the cancer, the better chance you have to cure the patient. And so I think we are within striking distance of curing some cancers, or actually improving survival rates to 90% and above. There are now tests that are being developed that would enable to diagnose cancer at a very early stage. Say lung cancer, if you diagnose it early and you treat it well, your probability of being alive 5 years later is 90%.
Wow, that's incredible progress.
Yeah.
Now, one of the other exciting parts of the pharmaceutical field and the innovation that's happening is around gene therapy, and it's being used hopefully to treat super rare diseases that we've never been able to treat before. Where could you see this technology going, and what are AstraZeneca's ambitions when it comes to gene therapy?
We have selected a number of technologies that we are investing in. Gene therapy is not one of those. Not because we don't believe in it, not because it has no place. It certainly has a great place, but we can't be everywhere. So we are involved in antibody drug conjugates, for instance, in cancer. We are looking at cell therapy, both in cancer and outside of cancer. We're looking at cell therapy, for instance, to rejuvenate the heart or the kidney. But we're not investing in gene therapy. But certainly I can see gene therapy make a big difference in the near term to more limited, more targeted diseases that are smaller orphan type diseases. But over time it can certainly expand.
Now, the underground prescription drug market is a big problem, and now you can fairly easily access a lot of drugs online, in particular generic versions of drugs. Do you think enough is being done by the industry and by the government to control access to black market drugs?
Well, I would say the black market is probably more an issue in some countries than others. If you look at the United States, Europe, Japan, it's very limited, and then suddenly the regulators, the authorities, and then the pharmaceutical industry are all working very closely to make sure that no black market develops and no fake drugs really is introduced in their respective countries. There are countries where it is more difficult to monitor, but I think overall everywhere in the world the standards are going up, and we have, as a company, we've done a lot to limit the black market and the copies and the fakes. I mean, in China, for instance, there was a period of time when you had lots of fake products, and people were taking medicines that were actually not medicines. Regulators are managing this. We are working hard to reduce it also, and I think it is still a problem, but getting under control in many countries.
Now, drug companies and distributors have come under a huge amount of pressure in the U.S. for their role in fueling the opioid epidemic. Of course, AstraZeneca is in no way linked to the opioid crisis, but I'm curious, looking at the broader pharmaceutical industry, if you think this has undermined trust in drug makers.
Yeah, I mean, I think the industry, to be honest, has a trust issue, and then and it is kind of a pity, really, because you have thousands and thousands of people across the industry who come to work every day wanting to do a great job and discovering medicines that really transform the care of many patients and improve diseases. But a few rogue agents and a few misbehaviors in the industry have created a sort of a mistrust, and we have to work hard to rebuild this, because fundamentally we're all about innovation, discovering new medicines, and transforming medicine.
Coming up on the CNBC Conversation, Pascal Soriot, CEO of UK-headquartered pharmaceutical company AstraZeneca, on the impact of Brexit.
Cambridge has been a great place to do science for the last few hundred years. As a company, what we're looking for is predictability of our environment. But we will adapt to any circumstance, whether the UK is still part of Europe or not.
How do you feel like the trust has evolved over time? Do you feel like the public at this point in time is particularly trusting of the drug industry relative to history, or do you think they're more skeptical?
I think over the last few years we have to accept the trust level has decreased, in part because of what you just mentioned, but in part also because of cost and pricing. We just have to face the reality of this. In the United States, the healthcare system has many, many good parts to it, and we always need to remember that patients get access to new medicines much faster in the US than anywhere else in the world, in particular in Europe, where you have to wait 2-3 years until drugs are reimbursed. But there are also issues in the healthcare system in the US. Many patients don't get good coverage. So I think the discussions that are ongoing in Congress hopefully will bring some solutions to these issues, providing, for instance, a copay cap so patients are protected and they don't pay more than $2,000 or $3,000 a year out of pocket. And then many other changes, the use of biosimilars, etc., will help reduce costs. And we will, as an industry, but other stakeholders, insurers, etc., will have to share some of the cost that is not covered by patients tomorrow. But that's the only way forward, because we have to move forward and get out of this situation we are in, where maybe not nobody, but many people tend to not trust us anymore.
So is it fair to say that the US healthcare system in its current form can't absorb the high cost of these new advanced therapies that are coming to market?
Actually, I don't think so. I think that what it is the system needs to evolve. First of all, patients have to be protected for these copays, because it's a big problem for them, number one. And number two, if they don't take their medicines because they can't afford it, then they're not going to benefit. So innovation doesn't work if patients can't afford it, right? So you have to protect patients. And then you are left with, how do you manage the cost? And I think the way to manage the cost is to introduce biosimilars for biologics, have a very healthy generic industry, but also, more importantly, to look at how medicines can contribute to reducing the totality of healthcare costs. How do we keep patients out of the hospital? How do we keep patients from having complications that cost a lot to treat, and of course are bad for them as an individual, but cost society a lot of money? And the way to do this is to get to a stage where we can actually capture the totality of costs. Primary care costs, pharmacy costs, hospital costs. And we capture all of this and we say, okay, how do medicines help us reduce all these costs? That's how I think it has to be managed moving forward.
How do you incentivize that kind of thinking?
Payers who have control over the totality of the cost are incentivized. So first of all, you have to have one single accountable payer, if you will. Now, in any circumstance, a country or wherever, where the management of the cost is fragmented. So you have someone taking care of drug costs, another one department taking care of hospital costs, another one about primary care costs. Then everybody is behaving in a way that manages their own budget. You have to have someone who has the responsibility for the totality. That's number one. And number two, which actually is a big problem, is you have to have systems in place that captures all these costs. The NHS in the UK is getting there. But some payers and insurers in the US are getting there. But in many countries, everything is still fragmented, and payers are not able to capture the totality of the information that would enable these calculations. We're gonna get there, because that's the only way forward, but it's still fragmented.
And as a company whose R&D headquarters is in Cambridge in the United Kingdom, how do you deal with the uncertainty surrounding Brexit?
Well, I think that, as I often say, Cambridge has been a great place to do science for the last few hundred years, and I'm sure it's going to be a great place to do science in the next few hundred years, Brexit or no Brexit. So as a company, we're like any company or any business. What we're looking for is certainty, not certainty, but predictability of our environment. Anything that is not helping on the predictability front is not really good. But we will adapt to any circumstance, whether the UK is still part of Europe or not. You know, on the medicines front, we've organized ourselves to make sure patients don't miss out. And on the research front, we have, you know, a great location in Cambridge. We have great relationships with people there and academia. We are attracting people from around the world. Look, we are able to attract Chinese and American scientists. We'll attract Spanish or German scientists tomorrow, whether they're part of Europe or not. Yeah.
Now let's talk about emerging markets and how you serve these parts of the world. We've observed a rapid urbanization of these developing markets. India and China, real prime examples of this. How do you best serve these markets?
Well, actually, it's a great question because there are lots of people in China or India who actually need our medicines. And if I look at China, for instance, we've done two things. We have accelerated the approval of the filing and the approval of our new medicines, and the government has really helped a lot in that area. They have changed completely the way they are looking at new drugs, and they've adopted many practices that are in place in the US or elsewhere to look at innovation. But also they have introduced processes that reduce the cost of older medicines. So we've had to do two things: accelerate innovation and bringing it to patients, but also as older medicines experience price declines, we were able to bring them to parts of China that in the past could not afford them. So we've expanded our coverage of China, we've expanded our commercial teams and our medical teams, and we are bringing these older medicines that are good medicines but older, lower price, to patients who could not afford them before. So we're doing both, expanding the coverage so we grow volume of older medicines, but also introducing innovative medicines faster.
Why have you been able to capture market share in China much better than your multinational peers?
Fantastic people. We have a great team, and we've been recruiting outstanding people to do a stellar job. But we've also been very steady in our investment. We identified many years ago China as a very important market for the future. And in fact, we've steadily invested, even during the ups and downs. You know, China has had ups and downs, and our industry has had challenges there, but we've continued investing there. We've expanded our presence. Historically, we, like everybody else, were focused in the big cities, mostly the coastal cities that were more developed. But over the last few years, we've expanded to the whole of China. We don't cover, actually, surprisingly, maybe for many people, we don't cover the whole of China yet. We have a very large team, but we don't cover the whole of China yet. So there's still more to come, more people we can reach and help.
And final question, stepping back, what do you think the pharmaceutical industry is going to look like in 20 years?
It's a great question. I don't know, to be honest, but I think I think if I had a prediction, I would say it would be in many ways the same. I focused on science and coming up with innovation. There's an enormous explosion of new technologies. We were historically talking about small molecules, chemicals, if you will. Then we talked about biologics. Now we're talking about a whole range of technologies: cell therapy, siRNA, I mean, all sorts of new gene therapy, all sorts of new technologies. So from that viewpoint, the same new technologies. But I think what would be new is the introduction of digital and AI, and merging those two, the medicines and AI and digital, to better deliver those treatments and help patients manage their diseases much better than today.
That's all for this episode. Join us next time on the CNBC Conversation.